what I don't understand, and honestly, I really don't know, because everything that I've read doesn't make it seem, or at least it doesn't say, that there's an enforcement mechanism for this disinformation board. So is it just that the disinformation board is going to get together and study disinformation and try to challenge it? The government is really good at studying stuff and not doing much. So, they study reparations. They won't even study that, but they'll study things and not actually do something. So is this actually something that has an enforcement mechanism where people will be, uh, you know, punished for disinformation? Or is that just kind of an Orwellian thought that people on the right have, think it's going to lead down a particular path that's going to lead to us locking people up for spreading lies on the internet?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it just so happens that I'm in the middle of an article, which I hope to publish later today, that addresses exactly that question that you just asked, Jason, which is it kind of a form of exaggeration or hysteria to treat this as something more than it is? Is it really just this kind of like benign, like advisory board that just got poorly named, and as the Homeland Security Secretary tried to say on CNN, was just poorly communicated in terms of what it is? Or is it something actually more pernicious? And I think it's definitely something more pernicious, and I'll explain to you why. For me, the single worst, most egregious official disinformation campaign of the last several years was in the lead up, the weeks prior to the 2020 election, when the corporate media united with the intelligence community and big tech to lie to the American people and to claim that these emails that came from Hunter Biden's laptop that shed light on Joe Biden's business dealings in China and Ukraine were not authentic, but were in fact Russian disinformation. It was clear to me at the time that that was a complete lie, that those emails were authentic. I've authenticated large archives in my career. I know how to do that. And all the indicia was it was authentic, but now we have the definitive proof, even from an establishment perspective, that the New York Times and the Washington Post both have said they've authenticated these materials. So we know that it was false, what we were told by all of these institutions. The most important thing to recognize about that episode is that the way that worked was that it wasn't big tech or media outlets which pronounced this archive to be Russian disinformation. They created a kind of pretense of quasi-official authoritative decree by getting these intelligence officials to cite their quote unquote expertise to say, look, we don't have proof that this came from Russia, but our experience tells us that, in the words of James Clapper on CNN, this has all of the hallmarks of Soviet Russian tradecraft. So they elevated this lie, this disinformation campaign, with the pretense of expertise, some sort of official decree. It wasn't just part of the back and forth political partisan debate. It was the people who are, trained experts in disinformation pronounced that it was so, and that then justified and enabled and even forced the media to ignore it, the Facebook and Twitter to ban it, because the word was passed down from the mountaintop, like the 10 Commandments. This is Russian disinformation. This is the same reason that you have this entirely new, extremely well-funded industry with all of these groups that have benign sounding names, like the Institute for, Objective Scholarship, or the group to combat, radical disinformation. And you have all these people who are presented as these, experts in disinformation who are apolitical and float above the political debates. And when you look at them, they're all funded by the same small handful of left liberal billionaires like George Soros and Pierre Omidyar. They're all tied to the CIA or the MI6 or European Union and NATO intelligence agencies, often to even Facebook and Google. That has the same goal, which is to say, it's not the left or the right that determines disinformation. There's this kind of special group, this kind of elevated, ennobled priesthood that sits on the mountaintop and passes down decrees, kind of like they tried to elevate partisan journalism by calling it fact checking. That's what the attempt is to do. And the ability to label something disinformation is incredibly powerful, because you can get big tech to censor it. Yeah. You can get media outlets to ignore it. And in many countries, including in the EU and Canada, it's actually a crime. And there's legislation pending to criminalize it even more, to disseminate disinformation. So what this is in Homeland Security is an attempt to create an official designation of what is and isn't disinformation, that given the First Amendment probably will not, at least in the United States for the moment, result in having the FBI come to your house and arrest you if you defend ideas that this board has proclaimed to be disinformation.
Right.
But it will certainly make it far more likely, and in the minds of millions of people, far more justified for big tech to censor you or deplatform you if you use it. And ultimately, for you to start having legal jeopardy in other countries and probably soon in the United States for engaging in a campaign to disseminate what the US government has officially decreed will be disinformation. But at the very least, it will shape media discourse, popular perception. That's what it's designed to do, is to take these ridiculous, this woman who's they picked to run it is like a cartoon of like a resistance extremist. There's no Democratic Party disinformation campaign she hasn't ratified. There's no absurd leftist hashtag she hasn't posted all over Twitter. She sung a fucking song about disinformation, calling herself the Mary Poppins of disinformation. This idea of disinformation expertise itself is a fraud. Like, how do you develop an expertise in disinformation? There's no place you go and study it. There's no licensing board. There's no field of discipline and any, it's all a concoction to elevate it from what it really is, which is just a partisan or ideological or political weapon, into something that seems more neutral, more scientific, and therefore more authoritative.
Get out of here! Look!